Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Looking forward to it. Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us. How bad is the rain outside right now? None? Okay, because when I was on the way here, then it looked like it might wash the whole thing away, but I'm absolutely delighted that it did not. My name is Gabor Holsch, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Royal Asiatic Society China History Club. I'm running the history-related events, and tonight is going to be one of those. So you probably know, I think most of us are friends and members of the RAS, that we bring all kinds of topics to you: literature, urbanism, history, art, and more. So this evening, I am very delighted to welcome. I have the urge every time to pronounce your name Chen Baizhu, but actually you go by Baizhu Chen in the academic community, who is actually guides us to a space in between history and fiction, which I find absolutely fascinating, because many of us claim this, but Professor Chen is the one who has the evidence and the expertise to claim that I think the borderline between the two is not always as clear as we think. And I'm always delighted to see when somebody crosses over from one realm to the other and go into the mystery of the past. And historians very often warn us not to confuse history with mystery, but those who know the exact difference, I think, will bring an absolutely fascinating story to us. And all the more because Professor Chen is going to guide us into a topic which is becoming quite emotional these days, especially in this country, and also in the United States. So I have a kind of aversion towards introducing people that I don't know very intimately. So I hope, Professor, that you will be able to introduce yourself briefly to our audience, and take about 40 minutes or even a little bit more to give us your talk, and then we will switch back into basically conversation mode. I don't even say question and answer, Q&A, just conversation mode, because we are all friends here. Now, you asked me if you are supposed to use a microphone. I would say just test our audience, because for any other purposes we don't need the mic. So when you start speaking, just feel free to ask everybody if they can hear you well without the mic. If they can, then you can just simply switch this off. Sure. Thank you very much, Professor Chen.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me in the back? Can you hear me in the back? No? Okay, so I assume that you prefer this one. That's fine. A little bit of clarification. What I'm going to tell you today, this is not fiction. Okay? This is real. This is true. But I do make a fiction. So this is not MSU make shit up. I do have some made shut up MSU. Now I wrote a historic fiction book in Chinese, and based on some historical event. But I made some, I came from Los Angeles, so of course I'm close to Hollywood. So you need to add some Hollywood feature in it, right? Some usual suspect stuff in it. So anyway, but what I'm going to go over with you is these are happened in the history and today, okay? So a little bit introduction of myself. So let me watch my time. And so what time that we have to cut it off? The total time. I'm not talking about, so including Q&A. What time do we have to cut off? Tell me.
I would be happy to let you know when we are approaching 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock, okay. So maybe I should run through 45 minutes for the thing. Okay, then Q&A. Right? So about 8 o'clock that we do Q&A. Is that?
No pressure at all.
Okay. Yeah, just want to do so that I can budget my time. Okay. Okay. So a little bit introduction of myself. I grew up here in the city in Shanghai, and I went to US in 1985. I graduated from the university across town, Fudan University. 1980, I studied mathematics. 1985, went to University of Rochester to study economics. And I stayed on since then. And I've been working in USC since 1994. So I've been there for a long time. I travel back and forth quite often, usually 6 or 7 trips a year. Not last year, 0. So I figured that this year I don't have a class in the spring semester, so I came back before February, and I was placed in a very nice jail. And I figured that since the sunk cost is so high to come back to China, I would rather stay here for a little longer. So I'm going to stay here until August. Okay? I'm an economist by training. I'm more on the macro global business side. But my hobby is history. And this is what I love. And I think that that's what they said, that if you don't understand what happened today, you read history. And because what happened today all happened in history. And if you don't understand history, and you look at the today, because history is just happening in today's life. Okay? So I'm going to get into this, and so this is I got a little bit outline to help us go through. So I'm going to walk you over some of the history and some of the current U.S. trade, and then why trade war. Okay. All right. So in 1773, December 16, there's a person in Boston. His name is Samuel Adams, and you probably don't know him. If you like a beer, there's a beer named after him. Yes, that's his beer. He's a cousin of John Adams, the second president of the United States. Samuel Adams is a tea smuggler. And in that evening, he led about 100 people, camouflage themselves as Indian, and boarded a ship called the Dartmouth, and dumped over 300 cases of tea into Boston Harbor, the so-called Boston Tea Party. And that started the American Independence War. Right? Very few American kids know that the tea actually came from China. Right? American kids thought that these are the English tea, but they actually came from China, because there was only one country in the world in those days could do commercialized high-quality tea, which is China. Okay? And British at the time, it was colony to Great Britain, so they got the teas, the East India Company, they got tea from China, and they taxed them, and they shipped it to the Boston, New England. And those merchants, including Samuel Adams, and they don't like this high expensive tea, so they smuggle the tea directly from China or from the Dutch. So they got into conflict with the British, and they started this Boston Tea Party, and started the Independence War. The war lasted for 8 years. 1782, the Brits just fed up. They said, okay, we're going to leave it alone, we're going home. But they still did not recognize the United States as an independent country, so the Royal Navy still chasing the Yankees in the ocean. So Yankees have to build this faster, slimmer ship, which is called Clippers. And today there's a basketball in my town, in Los Angeles, called Clippers, right? And which is faster, and we can evade British Royal Navy. 1783 summer, Britain and the United States signed the peace treaty, formally recognized the United States as an independent country. So by the time the United States decided to officially send a trade delegation to China, because now the Royal Navy is no longer chasing them, so they can send a country to send a delegation to China. And the ship is called Empress of China. So this is the Boston Tea Party. This is the original drawing in the newspaper. This is the Empress China. The painting was hanging in the New England Historical Society. Right? This ship took 14 months round trip. Right? The destination is China. Anyone have any clue that which city this ship was heading to? Ningbo, Guangzhou. Yes. It's called Canton. Canton. Okay. Canton. In those days, was the only city allowed to do trade by the Chinese law, and it was the richest city in the entire world in those days. How many people know that how many cities in the United States call itself Canton? You know there's a canton in Ohio, which is the largest canton, and over 500,000 population. Any cities over 500,000 population in the United States is a big city. Okay? So Canton, Ohio, anyone? Any other?
New Jersey?
Canton, New Jersey?
Yeah.
Yes, there is a Canton, New Jersey. Any other guess?
Maybe every state.
Every state. My sister has a house. She used to live in Canton, Michigan, which I also visited. There's one in Massachusetts. There's also one canton in New York. There are total 28 cities in the United States, called itself canton. And there are total 39 cities in the entire world, including Canton in the world, and 2 in Mexico, by the way. So because Canton was the richest city, every other cities in the world wants to imitate and wants to be as rich as Canton. 39 cities. Okay, Canton. So Empress China went all the way to Canton and brought back to New England the usual suspect, the silk, right, and porcelain, a lot of porcelain, and 600 cases of teas, and 20,000 Nanking trousers. I have no idea what Nanking trouser is, and but it's trousers. Close, right? So you can tell from this trade pattern, Chinese export those sophisticated products to the United States. Well, think about those, right? And the porcelain, these are the manufacturing products. Nanking trouser, these are the manufacturing products. The Chinese were exporting manufacturing products. Teas, and you don't regard the tea as much a product these days. The tea used to be was at the same status as Tesla and iPhone in those days. And the tea was very significant. The reason tea was very significant was that Europeans were buying teas left and right from China. They buy lots of teas, and you may wonder why the Brits and the Europeans buy lots of teas from China. Right? You may guess why. Well, the reason was that Europe at the time just went through the Industrial Revolution. The early days of the industrial capitalism was very cruel, just like what Charles Dickens said in his novel. So you need something to wake people up in the factory. And the tea served the purposes. You put the teas in hot water and add some sugars, which combine the caffeine and with calorie, so that workers can generate more profits for the capitalists. Right? So, and the teas, because of the large amount of teas they imported from China, Chinese were not buying much from the Brits. So there was a huge trade imbalance. Britain ran a gold standard. The Chinese ran the silver standard. So the Brits had to use the gold to buy silvers around the world. In fact, in those days, 1/3 of the silver newly mined in the New Spain, Peru and Mexico, end up in China. Right? So Brits was worried about that. And the British found a very good product which Chinese loved it, which is called opium. And once the opium entered into the picture, the trade balance reversed. The Chinese started to run huge trade deficit. So the silver started to flow out of China. When silver flowed out of China, the money supply, silver is the money supply, started to shrink. As the money supply shrank, the economy withered. As the economy withered, the taxes, there was no taxes for the emperors. So emperors got worried about this. Emperor called upon the huge meeting. The Politburo extended the meetings and called upon all the generals and party secretary all the way to Beijing, 300 of them. Let's have a discussion. And majority of them voted for legalization of opium. Only 8 people against it. And the emperor listened to these 8 people and decided to ban opium. And he sent Mr. Lin Zexu all the way to Canton. You may wonder why the emperor sent Mr. Lin to Canton. Mr. Lin is a Politburo Standing Committee member. He's very, one of the 7 people, big shot. In those days, there was no fly, no high-speed array. And they have to ride on a horse for 2.5 months. Right? Because nobody wants to ban the opium. There is no way that when the emperor said ban the opium, nobody listened. So the emperor will have to send the Politburo Standing Committee member all the way to Canton to do this. And the rest of the story, we all know that. Before the war, Chinese lost it, opium became legalized. Ever since. All right? So that was the little bit of history of that. So you may wonder what kind of things America sent to Canton, to Chinese. Well, on that ship, Empress of China, on that ship, there was animal fur, there was animal lard, because America in those days was a very poor country. So you shot a boar, you eat the meat, you skin the fur, you take out the lard for the lamb, for the life, right? And a lot of roots coming out of the forest, and the Chinese love to buy them. America have no clue why the Chinese love to eat those roots. Well, America said, what the heck, if they want to pay big money, just let them buy it, right? These roots, even today, Chinese still flock them to buy them. It's called American ginseng. And on that ship, it's called, the Chinese way, it's called flower flag ginseng. Flower flag, hua qi seng, flower flag, yeah. The reason is that when the Empress China arrived in Canton, nobody knows where this ship came from. Right? In those days, there's no diplomatic relationship, things as, they will send a letter, say, hey, we have a new country, we want to establish a relationship. The ship just arrived. So people look at this, we know the Russian, we know the German, we know the French and Brits, and who are these people? Or the flag looked like a flower. So flower flag people, they call it flower flag devil. Falling devils, right? So that's why they call it a flower flag ginseng and a flower flag bank. The Citibank is called a flower flag bank. Anyway, so a little side story of that. And on that ship, there's still a lot of silver. So America, even from the very beginning, they were running a trade deficit against China. So the ship made $30,000 profit, net profit. I'm talking about deduct all the costs, net profit $30,000. A huge money, because the GDP per capita in New England in those days was only $150. So the ship made $30,000, that's a huge money. And that attracted a lot of people from New England to travel to China to seek opportunity. And one of them, his name is Samuel Russell. Samuel Russell came from a very prominent family in New England, and his ancestor was the founder of Yale University, but he was an orphan, and parents died early, so he decided to, when he's very young, adventured out to Canton, set up a company called Russell and Company, which was later became the largest multinational corporation trading company between China and the United States. He stayed here in China for about 20 years, and he retired. So anyway, so here are the porcelain that the beautiful, right? I mean, the Chinese, this porcelain Chinese sold, and they can even personalize. You like, you want a George Washington? No problem. We'll make one for you, right? So these are good, yeah. No. So this is Samuel Russell, and the company he built is called Russell and Company. And Russell retired after he made money. He became a millionaire, and he built his mansion, and he later donated his mansion to Wesleyan University. And his cousin was the founder of one of the founder of Skull and Bones in Yale. They are big donor of Yale University, the whole family. Right. What does Russell and Company do? Russell and Company, of course, trade the porcelain, China, tea, Nanking trouser, and lots of opium. And people thought that opium is a British thing. You know, Brits are the drug lord, and they are the drug smuggler. But America was at the time also smuggling the opium in China, but they're at a small scale compared to the Brits. So this guy, you probably don't know him, but you know Columbia University. If you go to Columbia University, you may want to visit its library and pay attention who this library is named after. It's named after Abbot Lowe. This person stayed in Canton for 10 years and joined Russell and Company, and later he started his own company. And part of the business is opium. Right? And he, when he passed away, or his inheritance went to his son. His son later, his son was the mayor of New York City, and the president of Columbia University. So his son used $1 million to build the library. So $1 million. So the two lessons I always when I give lectures in the university, I draw two lessons. If you're going to make money, if you made money in the future, you want to donate money to the university. Number one lesson. Number two, if you want to donate, and better as early as possible you can. Because in those days, $1 million buy you a library. Today, $1 million doesn't go anywhere. All right? So if you want to donate, as early as possible. So John Clef Green, and he was also a partner of Russell and Company. Made money by trading opium and other things too. And he was a big donor of Princeton University. There was a street in Princeton named after him called the Green Street. And he donated science, School of Science, but School of Science was burned down by fire, and they rebuilt it, called the Green Hall of Engineering in Princeton University. You probably don't know him, Warren Delano. The very few Americans, when I was in a school in USC, I asked people, do you know Warren Delano? Very few people know that. Some people, one or two, would say, what about the Franklin Delano Roosevelt? And that rings the bell. And he is the grandfather of FDR, and from his mother's side. When he was young, as a 20-something, he was nobody. And he did not come from a very prominent family and didn't have much money, and he was a sailor. And his grandparents, his uncle, his father, all the sailors. And he decided to venture out to Canton. He joined the Russell and Company and started from a junior clerk, all the way, made his way to Chief Operation Officer. And he started Turkish opium business for the Russell and Company. And because we know that opium was monopolized by the Brits, and America in those days was, is a young boy in the block, right? The Brits don't, they look down upon the Americans, so they have to venture out to start their own business. Happened to be that there is, Turkey also produce a lot of opium. And there is, even today, there is a province in Turkey named after opium. It's called Afyon. There's a province called Afyon. He stayed here, Delano stayed in China for 10 years and made himself a millionaire. And so he returned after the Opium War, he returned to New York. He has overseas experience. He worked in a multinational corporation, right? He was handsome, he has money, so a lot of women are chasing him. And he married to the daughter of Chief Justice of Massachusetts. Perfect marriage between capital and power. He moved himself into the high class. And he lost all his money. He lost all his money, he bankrupt. And so after he bankrupted, what happened is that he decided to, all his family, including FDR's mother at the time, who was very young, took them to China and smuggled opium again for another 5 years. But at the time, opium was legalized in China, so it was very difficult. And from an economist's perspective, only illegal things that you can make an extraordinary, ridiculous amount of money, right? And when it's legalized, there is no extra profit you can make. So it was very difficult for him to sell opium again in China. So in the end, he made his money by selling opium back to the United States. Because there was a civil war. So he convinced people in the US to buy his opium. Anyway, so that part of the story is real, but how they smuggled opium, nobody knows. That's how I made Shut Up. And I wrote a book in Chinese and adding some Hollywood feature in it. I do have the book with me. Because it's pretty heavy, so I only bought two copies. For those people who can't read Chinese, I'll be happy to give it to you. So it's called Hei Tu Cong Yao. So it's a black dirt crossing the ocean. Black dirt basically is an opium. The Chinese in the old days called Turkish opium black dirt. So anyway, so okay. A couple of more people here. Is John Forbes. Okay, I think I need to do that fast. Forbes' brother. 3 brothers came to China. One brother died in China. Thomas Forbes died in China. John Forbes was working for Hokwa as executive assistant. Hokwa, anyone know Hokwa? Yeah, history. Who is he?
He was a comprador. He was one of the people who was a middleman between the opium trade. My favorite story about him is when he died, his net worth was more than the GDP of the United States.
Exactly. He was the richest man in the entire world. He was not the richest man in China. He was the richest man of the entire world. Jack Ma is nobody compared to him. Jack Ma, who is Jack Ma? Forget him. Right? And because 20% of the teas imported into Europe came from his tea farm. 20% of European tea came from his farm. So of course he was very rich. And John Forbes, working for him as executive assistant, made a very good relationship with Hua, and Hua treated him like his own son. So when Forbes decided to return to the United States, Hua gave him a lot of money, large sum of money to take with him to the United States to invest. That was saying that the amount of money that Hua gave it to me is more than the total amount of money the Rothschild family invested in the railway in the United States. Now, John Forbes built the first railway in Chicago. He built the Chicago Railway, became a railway tycoon, and during the business time, and he needed a lawyer working for him. So there was a lawyer work for him for the legal purposes, and this lawyer decided to want to go to politics and ran for the senators of Illinois, and he was a backer of that young senator. And this young senator decided to go ran for the president, and Forbes was the big donor behind that, and he won. He became the president. And he was Abraham Lincoln. And we know that Abraham Lincoln built the Republican Party. And the Republican Party is also called the Lincoln's Party. So when Lincoln set up the Republican Party, he named John Forbes as the chairman of National Committee, of National Republican Committee. So that was, so if you go to Forbes Museum in the suburb of Boston, you will see this decoration. And on the wall, there's a painting of this old Chinese dude. Nobody really knows who the person is. He used to be the richest man in the world. So rest for sure, after 150 years, nobody will remember who Jack Ma is. So I'm not going to talk about it since because of the time. So this is at the hotel. All right. Anyway, so he was the one that trading the fur and almost bankrupt, but shipped one boatload of Turkish opium to China, made a huge amount of money, started buying land in New York City. So the things that I want to through history, you see that the trade, couple of things. I think there were two things. One is that lessons I want to draw from here. America does have original sin. All right, America does have original sin by trading opium. If you think opium is bad, that thing, including other things, right? Second lesson from here is that from the early trade, and China-U.S. trade actually very complementary to each other, right? I mean, they benefit China and benefit the United States, both of them. So in the U.S. early development, and this patterns and also lasted even to today. If you look at today's U.S.-China trade, they're very complementary to each other, right? And if you look at this in early days of China-U.S. trade since 1980s, China was exporting mostly the labor-intensive products. U.S. was exporting China mostly the skill-intensive, capital-intensive products. Even you take some of the agricultural products as an example, you can see that there is a huge complementary. U.S. export mostly the wheat, corn, soybeans, which they are the land intensive. They need a large amount of land. You don't need a lot of people. So one person, one farmer, American farmer can farm huge land. In terms of the agricultural products, the Chinese be able to sell to the U.S. One example is garlic. Garlic is very labor-intensive product. And if you go to U.S. in the supermarket, I always urge my students to pay attention where they came from. And they very likely it says made in China. Right? America does produce garlic. The place that produce garlic is called the Gilroy. And people know the Gilroy. America said the Gilroy is the garlic capital of the world. You know, America is a very arrogant people. Every time they say that the garlic capital, they say it's the world, right? When they have the baseball series, they don't call it American baseball series, they call it the World Series, even though it's only Americans are playing there, right? So America is, you know, they think the garlic, Gilroy, of course, the garlic capital of the world, until the Chinese garlic showed up. They find out, whoa, there is Chinese garlic. they are better, cheaper, and it tastes better. So they couldn't do it, they couldn't deal with it. Gilroy has three major problems. One is the weather. California weather is always dry, the lack of rain. And second, it is too close to the Silicon Valley, 45 minutes south of Silicon Valley. The land is very expensive. Why you grow garlic? When the land is expensive, you turn it into real estate. That's what they do here in Shanghai, right? So the third, the Chinese garlic, right? So the Gilroy garlic farmer, they're very smart. They said, okay, we cannot beat the Chinese garlic, so what do? If we cannot beat them, we join them. So they join the Chinese garlic to become the saucer and the brand. So they buy the garlic from Shandong in China, and they put their label on this and distribute it in the US. Right? Perfect match and perfect complementary with each other. Give you another example. In 1985, some people in the United States found a perfect product the Chinese loved it, which is called the chicken feet. The chicken feet, Chinese women loved it. In 1986, it was a $6 million business. Today, the highest was $500 million. 40% of the U.S. poultry export to China is feet, right? So America can sell feet to China. Well, what part of chicken Chinese can sell it to the American? Chinese, well, the breast, right? The chicken breast. Yeah, I mean, one of my former students about 20 years ago came to China. And this is what I think American is still, you know, this is something very special, American people, right? This student doesn't speak any Chinese and never been to China, and he just flew to China. Start to buy chicken breast and dehydrate them, adding ginseng, ginkgo, whatever those bullshit stuff in it, and for the dog. You know, he claimed that these are good for the dog. The dog eat them will be healthy and happier. Well, the dog couldn't say anything, of course. And he made it and became enormously rich, and he sold the company to a private equity firm and lived happily ever after. So you can see that this is a perfect, you know, match between the China and the U.S. even from the chicken perspective. Right? Yeah. So now I think I have 9 minutes. So yeah. Okay. So 9 minutes. Even there's a lot of products. Even chips. I mean the silicon chips. Right? These high-tech products. There's a lot of complementary. And Chinese buy chips from America, from Intel. From others, from Micron, and put them in iPhone and iPad or a small electronic device and send back to the U.S. You know, you American consumers, you know, love to buy them, right? And it's a perfect match, right? So there's a lot of complementary between Chinese economy and the U.S. economy. Now, the issue here is that there was a war between China and the U.S., and which was fought in 2019, called the Trump trade war. Why there was a Trump trade war, right? And from economist perspective, it did not make any sense. It did not make any sense of the war, right? First of all, the US-China economy, they are complementary to each other, right? And China needs America, America needs China, right? That's one. Number two, the trade sectors only counts a very small percentage of the US GDP. The total trade deficit, the American trade deficit is less than 3% of its GDP. Why a president of the United States spends so much time, so much effort focusing on this 3% of GDP? It doesn't make any sense. And third, when you're fighting a trade war with China, you will lose, for sure. Right? Because when you're fighting a trade war, when you're fighting a war, war is not the goal. War is an instrument for you to achieve your goal. Right? So you may ask the question, what is the goal of fighting the trade war? According to Mr. Trump, he seems to try to reduce the trade deficit of America, of the United States. And he thinks that the US-China trade deficit is accounted about 60% of the total over 60% entire US trade deficit. So he said that he wants to reduce the trade deficit. And if this is the goal, I would say that you would have lost the war before you even started, because the total trade deficit of the United States is determined by its macro economic situation in the United States. Is determined by the national saving and the national investment in the United States. It's nothing to do with the tariff, right? And besides, and I'm using layman's language, layman's description, the total trade deficit is like all the air in the balloon. If you squeeze the China air, the air will come out from the other side. The balloon does not change, right? So if you impose a tariff against Chinese products, Chinese will sell those products to Vietnam, and then go from Vietnam to America as a Vietnamese export. Right? But in the end, it actually came from China. Right? So it will not change the trade deficit of the United States. But even that, I would say that Trump was very successful to create a new narrative. This new narrative described the relationship between China and the United States, which is very unfortunate. And this is America's view toward China. This is America's view toward China. This is when Trump was the president. And since Trump presidency, the American view toward China just steadily increased to today over 70%. 70% of the Americans hold negative views toward China. Very unfortunate. But on the other hand, you can also see that America holds more negative view toward China than positive since 2010, 2011, about that time. That was the Great Recession, the financial crisis in the United States. U.S. didn't do good, didn't do well. China was doing pretty well after 2010. So I think that there is something underneath already going on. And Trump is simply take advantage of this sentiment in the United States as a general for its political purposes. Right? And I think before I have 3 more minutes, so before I turn it to the audience for the questions, we say that I personally think that the U.S.-China has already stepped into the so-called Thucydides trap. That's my personal view. The so-called, just for people that don't know what a Thucydides trap is, Thucydides was a historian, ancient Greek historian, basically described the war between the Spartans and the Athens. And basically the Thucydides trap described a situation in which the second largest power, rising very rapidly, causing uneasiness of the largest power. So the largest power and the second power, they will have a conflict with each other. And someone did counted about 16 such cases in the history. 12 of them ended up in intensive war. So I think U.S.-China has already entered into, that's my personal view, and some other people may not believe this. The 2 points in the two-city trap is very important. One is that it's not the intention. It is not the intention, it is the capability. Or simply, in other words, it is the perceived capability by the largest power. Right? So even Chinese emperor, not Chinese emperor, Mr. Xi, Chinese party secretary, Mr. Xi said that the Pacific Ocean is large enough to accommodate the United States and China, both of us. China has no intention to replace America as the dominant power. We have no intention to play a leadership power in the world. We just want to manage our own stuff, make ourselves life better. Right? That's repeatedly the Chinese state that. Two-city trap basically is like, this is intention. Right? Intention is irrelevant. It's the capability, or even though it's not the real capability, but it's perceived capability, which is important. Right? So that is one thing. And the second point in the two-city trap is that watch out to those unexpected plays and event. And those are the places, those are the things that are more likely cause intensive conflict between the two countries. What I want to do, or we can do as ordinary people, is do our best, try not to lead the two countries slip in further into this trap and slip into this intensive conflict. And war between China and the United States is simply unimaginable, and hope this thing's not happen. So I think I am 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
Perfect. I'm a man of my word.
Yes,
8 o'clock. 8 o'clock.
Thank you very much, but don't go anywhere, please. So we would like to spend the rest of the time on questions and comments. Thank you very much. When I was looking at this chart and listened to your comments, then I remembered that an American poet wrote that you cannot win a war the same way you cannot win an earthquake. And this is one of my favorite quotes, but these days we can add, nobody will win COVID either. So I would like to open the floor. Please feel free to ask questions and make comments about any of what you heard. And I'm going to try to make sure that everybody gets heard, but at the end of the day, there are always 1 or 2 people who feel that their questions were not fully addressed. And then for those cases, we also encourage you to contact Professor Chen, especially if you read Mandarin, because I think some of us would like to see this text, not just these 2 volumes, but you can also tell. So let's start with that. Anybody who wants to contact you, anybody who's interested in this book,
sure.
Where do they start? The internet somewhere, obviously.
Well,
but,
I mean, this book is in Amazon, and they are selling in Amazon and in Taobao, in JD.com, so they all have that. It was just too heavy to carry, so I would love to.
可以读重要.
Yeah. But I wrote it according to TV series, so it's with the intention to.
I'm also showing it into a camera,
intended to convert it into a TV series, hopefully.
And if somebody would like to drop you a line, do you have like a website or a university site where?
Yeah, I have my email. I'll be happy to share my email, and I can write it down.
That's great.
On a board.
We can put it on the LinkedIn site of our society.
Email or WeChat or whatever you prefer. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now I will do my best to moderate comments and questions, I think we would like to start here.
Eager. So first of all, I want to say thank you very much for that wonderful summary of U.S.-China trade relations. Second of all, go Trojans. And third of all, I think it's quite interesting how you bring the Thucydides trap in, talking about Mearsheimer and realism, of course.
Yes.
But I'm just wondering your take on how you perceive the new administration. I mean, at least from where I see it, Biden is basically just Obama in a new wrapper. He doesn't really take much of the line that Trump has been trumpeting for the last 4 years. Sorry for the pun. He doesn't really take that line much further beyond, okay, we're not going to roll back the tariffs just yet, and we still have some strong words for China when it comes to human rights issues. But really, it just feels like we're back in time, like pre-2016. Yeah. And at least from my perspective, obviously people can disagree, but what would you say to that kind of return to this traditional engagement of like Obama era, that's bad, China, don't do that when it comes to human rights, but we're still going to probably work out something trade-wise that people will complain about, but live with. Yeah. Second of all, as far as the negative views on China, I'll be honest, as an American, I feel like most Americans have negative views about a lot of things. If it's not China, it was Japan in the 80s. If it's not China, it was the Middle East.
Is this called critical thinking?
No, it's just called pessimism, cynical thought, and just being kind of down on a lot of things. But living here in China, I just had this discussion earlier today with my dad. He's like, yeah, a lot of people look down, like they think negatively of China, but it's not like that, right? And I think the real issue is that people in America are just kind of isolated and just don't really consider that way of life in America, or way of life in general, can be different from what they're living. I don't know.
Sorry to interrupt. Make sure to end with a question.
Right. Well, my question was going back to the whole where you perceive Biden.
Okay. So I think where you're coming from. So let me try to answer. For Biden, the most important thing for him is domestic, right? For the domestic economy and the COVID and how to restart the economy, reopening, and China, can do that later. Think about this. With the tariff are already being imposed, right? And the trade component accounts very small percentage of GDP. America is still, in large sense, because of a huge economy, very much a domestic economy. So the trade part is a very small part of its GDP. So why bother spend effort on this, right? And besides, in order to push his domestic agenda, he needs the support from not only from the Democrat and from the Republican, from both sides. And currently, seems that the Republican Democrat, they seems to have a common agreement regarding how to deal with China. So why do you want to step in to meddle this muddy water? Right? And so you shy away from this for now and just let it go, because the tariff is not imposed by me. Right? Some people else just don't have time to deal with these things. So why you get into this? So I think it's from his perspective, it's a very smart, relatively smart way. Right? So I think for that, people needs to be patient. Needs to give it a time and to see how they're going to, gradually, maybe, possibly, they may improve the relationship going forward. We'll have to see, right? So I don't see when Biden coming to the administration in a few months ago, and I didn't see that he would jump into this foreign affairs, and particularly with China. It's not his top. It's not his top agenda. So domestic is one thing, and he do not want anything to derail his domestic agenda. So that's the bottom line for Biden. The second question is about the American views, right? American views toward China. America, I think most American is very American-centric. America, you ask people in Arkansas and people, they have no clue, what China is, and they never traveled there, and they don't know what Chinese economy, the country is. So when they got the information, they were fed by the newspaper, right, by the mainstream media or certain media that they choose to watch, right? And the media try to create it. It doesn't really. The funny thing is that if you, it doesn't matter you're left or right. When they come to China, the media, they all have negative views, right? So I don't know. You read CNN. Most of CNN news are very negative about China. And the Wall Street Journal, if you're on the right side, right? I mean, they're all very negative. And the thing says, I get a conclusion after reading those newspapers that every time when they mention China, they will always have some word in front of China. Communist China. Always. Once I have a Beijing, there's a communist Beijing. Always have some definite word. And funny thing, when they have in Hong Kong, when they report Hong Kong demonstrator, they also have a word in front of demonstrator. They call it democracy demonstrator, right? They always put a label on this before any substance in it, right? So I think Americans has been very much influenced by the elite. Elite has, and somehow the American elite has some way lost kind of confidence in a way, right? And this is not, that doesn't happen this time. It happened before, right? In the 1960s, in the 1980s, and 1960 was the time that the JFK, and what happened? And the Soviet got the Sputnik up in the sky. Where's our Sputnik? All right, and so in 1980s it was Japan, and now it's China. So so that there is a general anxiety in the American elite, among the American elite, and that in a sense also influenced ordinary people. And if you talk about international relation, and there's probably or the political science, you probably know that there was a scholar in Chicago, University of Chicago. His name is Leo Strauss. He is the founding father of new conservatism, right? And he was in academics. He was very much marginalized. Nobody paid attention to his theory, but his people controlled the administration in the later on during the Bush administration, right? And even today, many of them. And one of the key points of a new conservatism is that a country like the United States, which is coming from all different ethnicities and a different background, you need some common goals bonding them together. And you need to have a common enemy, always have a common enemy. If you don't have a common enemy, then you would have like a Roman Empire. Right? So, after the terrorists, China is perfect, and that's another, not necessarily true, but that's my interpretation. Right? Anyway, so any other? Yes.
Yeah, before we go into the next question, for those of you who are freezing, we cannot pull down the air conditioning, but I opened the door at the back, so we are going to go because I can see the body language. Yes, please.
So that chart is shocking.
Which one? Which chart?
No, I will just reopen this door.
Which chart?
The chart that you're showing here.
Oh, this chart.
The increase in negativity is unprecedented, in my understanding, in American history towards China. And so that's one thing. And of course, during the Trump regime, there was a lot of encouragement of hate crime in the United States. And,
unfortunate.
I think the combination of the two meant that Asian Americans seemed to be on the butt of a lot of, threatening and so on and so forth. So I'm asking you, as a Chinese American, do you feel that? Have you felt that in the last year or so?
Yeah.
That, your safety is not as good as it was, or
no? the place I came from is very safe. I personally, I've never experienced any hate crime against myself or against my friends and who I know. Which in Los Angeles, and it's probably not the frequent things. We have a lot of different ethnicities ethnic group in Los Angeles. The Chinese are a big community, and Korean, Japanese in Los Angeles. So I don't see that happen around me. So personally, I've never experienced that myself.
May I complement that with a question of my own?
Huh?
May
yes,
I complement that with a question of my own? Because what I was wondering about is, we were looking at those pictures of George Washington teacup and so on, and that was a period that was called in the United States Sino-US Trade Relationship, which is, by the way, the reason why people like George Washington wore a plaited queue. That was copied from China. Then, in half a century, the view on Chinese people in the early 19th century United States was very negative again.
Right.
In the 1920s, the Republican leaders of China sent their kids to the United States and adopted political blueprints from the United States. In a couple of decades, United States was the enemy. Then again, a couple of decades around the time when I arrived in China, around 2000, then again, America was the model in. So, Professor, how long will it take, and what will it take before this love affair reaches a new positive era, so to speak?
The love affairs and blossom again, right?
Exactly.
I think it will take quite a while. Personally, I think it will take quite a while before that they can reestablish the trust, right? Because I think the most important thing here is the trust has been violated. It's like I describe U.S.-China relationship at this moment is, I think it's more like a marriage of convenience with damaged trust. So it will take some time for this trust to be established, and America needs China for sure, right? Because they were talking about decoupling the so-called supply chain, and after the COVID last year, they find that it's impossible. It's difficult. So does China. China needs America. Right? And China needs America, but on the other hand, there is also this basic trust as being, the Chinese are saying, oh, okay, you prohibit selling the chips to us, and without the chips, and we cannot upgrade our technology, and Huawei almost died, right? Huawei's cell phone is becomes insignificant, right? And so that, from Chinese perspective, this is serious, and we need to recreate some of this basic technologies ourselves. On the other hand, America also has this kind of distrust of China too. They look at this, wow, what if we got into conflict and China holds a lot of our things, right? Think about this: 50% of masks produced by the Chinese. Right? What if the Chinese don't sell the mask? Of course, it didn't, right? Chinese lots of masks sent to the U.S. and a lot of antibiotics. China is the largest antibiotics exporter to the United States. And give one example, and heparin, and anyone in the pharmaceutical field, you probably know there is a product called heparin, which is a blood thinner, and you need heparins, otherwise your blood will clog. Right? And where does heparin came from? Heparin came from the pig intestine. And where does pig come from? They're all from China. Right? Chinese eat the pigs. And so there's 1 year, and there were the companies that made those heparins found that they're tempered. So some people died in the United States. So FDA banned the heparin import from China. But if there's no heparin, because there's only one country export heparin, which is China, people died. without heparin. So they have to struggle to find the replacement. So that's something that they were talking, the Americans talking from a strategic perspective, that you need certain reserve or certain alternative, right? Give another example, opioid, right? The painkillers. Funny thing is that Chinese is the largest exporter of opioid to the United States. So I think the history has a common, it goes around.
That's right.
In old days, when the Brits and Americans sold opium to China, today Chinese are selling opioid to them.
The shoe is on the other foot.
So,
all right, I would say let's take one more question, and then I would like to leave a little bit of time at the end when you can approach the professor as well. 2 more questions in that case. So 1, 2, and at the end we will leave a little bit of networking time, and we promise to finish at 8:30. All right, so your questions were number 2, and there was a question at the back, please.